Well, good afternoon. I'm Anne Forsyth, a Professor of Urban Planning at Harvard Graduate School of Design, and I'm here to welcome you to the GSD's Virtual Lunchtime Speaker Series, launched by Dan Dioka. This series is a way of connecting the GSD and others virtually. I have a couple of housekeeping items just before I introduce Dan. First of all, those of you who've been using Zoom lately may notice that the webinar has some different features. In particular, the chat function has been disabled so that we can all focus on Dan's presentation. But there is another feature added in for you to ask Dan questions. So you, the audience, can click on the Q&A button at the bottom center of your Zoom window, ask questions, and Dan will answer them at the end of his presentation. Also, before I turn things over to Dan, I want to mention a couple of upcoming lectures that are part of the GSD's newly launched virtual public lecture series, which features the voices of the GSD's own incredible faculty, plus a few others. Mark your calendars for this Friday, architect Oana Stănescu, and next Monday, April 13th, with Lala Khalili, Professor of International Politics at Queen Mary University in London. These will happen at noon on Zoom and require you to register. More information about the events as well as how to register are on the GSD website. But now we get to today's talk. And I'm very pleased to introduce Dan Dioka, an urban planner and principal and co-founder of the New York City-based architecture, planning, and research firm Interboro Partners. At the GSD, he's a design critic in urban planning and design, teaching core and option studios. But for today, what's most likely to be important is Dan is really inquisitive and creative, trying to figure out how design and planning can make a difference. And this includes producing very innovative products, but more so innovative processes for creativity. And I think some of these processes will be a focus of this talk on who, what, where. Over to Dan.
Okay, thank you, Anne. Thanks for that nice introduction. I've actually known Anne for close to 20 years now, and she remains an inspiration. If you haven't had a chance to check out her talk that she gave a couple nights ago on public health, do check it out. It's very timely. So thanks for this opportunity to share some recent work. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope wherever you are healthy and safe. This is one of the first one of these I've ever done. So please bear with me. That said, technologically, I think I'm in good hands here. Okay, so with that, I'm gonna share my screen. And off we go. So you've probably done this experiment already, but bear with me. Let's imagine, Rip Van Winkle style, you were asleep for the past month. You wake up, you look at the news, you know, you're a planner, so you're looking at City Lab, Next City, Plan Edison, etc. And you see headlines like these, and optimistic, you go outside and you wonder what miracle of urban planning happened while you were sleeping. According to these headlines, people are visiting parks more too. You go for a hike, and it's true. Great to see so many people on the trails, and on a Wednesday afternoon. Air pollution's down too. Urban planning looks like it's doing fine without me. Look at these amazing before and after maps. The headlines get better and better. It says here that more people are turning directly to farms for food. That's great indeed. It's so good to see so many people at the farmers market. Cities are upping their game. So many seem to be closing streets to car traffic, so many new bike lanes. But of course, as the glow you felt at reawakening fades, as you stop cherry picking the news for the good bits, you realize you've missed something very important here. Of course, that the bike shines because of a global health emergency, that people are flocking to parks because of an outbreak, that the ozone layer is healing because humanity is at a standstill, that small farms are thriving because supermarkets are hazardous. Also that there's something called the coronavirus. So I can talk now about how we've got to work hard to ensure that these good things survive post-pandemic. And I will stop to acknowledge that, but I want to say something else here. I actually want to say that reading half the headline can work in the other direction too. So let's imagine instead, same story, except that in this scenario, the protagonist just wrote a book. It's called The Arsenal of Exclusion and Inclusion. It's a book that examines some of the policies, practices, and physical artifacts that have been used by planners, policymakers, developers, real estate brokers, community activists, and other urban actors in the United States to draw, erase, or redraw the lines that divide. It's a book that systematically inventories the ways in which people in power keep people out of parks, off street corners, and away from beaches. So this new protagonist looks at the news and sees headlines like this and goes outside and sees essentially that public space is out of business. So one of the first things he notices is that all the basketball hoops are being removed or, retrofitted in some curious ways. And indeed, this is making the news. They're closing the basketball courts. He actually wrote about this in this Arsenal book about how, for example, in 2012, the majority white town of Springfield, New Jersey, nearly voted to dismantle its outdoor basketball hoops on the grounds that one of its parks was attracting out-of-town players, primarily young black males, who are allegedly monopolizing the courts, swearing and harassing locals. Quote, "People are intimidated," one resident complained. "I used to look out my window at a beautiful park with parents and kids playing soccer. Now it looks like Rahway State Prison Yard." Wow, he thought. They must have read the book. However, of course, it was never meant to be a user's manual. We were saying, don't do that. It's racist. In fact, there are few people hanging out at all in this scenario. Why is everyone so far apart? Maybe they read the chapter in the book about loitering ordinances and got some ideas. But again, here, this author was trying to make the point that loitering is actually a good thing, and that telling people not to loiter is kind of weird. What is loitering anyway? So in this book, our protagonist has actually assembled a sampling of loitering definitions taken from ordinances around the country just to prove what an absurd idea it is. For example, did you know that in New York, a person is guilty of loitering when he loiters? That's actually the definition. Bad guys didn't pick up on the irony. Doesn't seem that way. Anyway, or maybe a free speech zone has been implemented. So he wrote about these in the book too. These are areas designated by law enforcement for political protest, generally located at a distance from whatever event, group, or institution is actually being protested. So, you can see one here with chain link concrete and barbed wire. They're sometimes dubbed protest pens. So maybe there's one of these happening out there. Maybe they implemented a sidewalk management plan. Young people, by the way, nowhere to be found. In fact, this Arsenal book had lots of ideas about how to keep kids away. So for example, play classical music from hidden speakers. They hate it, they'll probably split. Neurologists actually explain that when people hear music they don't like, their brain suppresses dopamine production. Or maybe, use ultrasonic noise. That thing in the bottom right is called the mosquito. It's a device that emits an extremely annoying high frequency tone that, thanks to the degradation of the human hearing, is only audible to people under the age of 25. The beaches, pretty empty too. They must have read the parts of the book about how to keep people away from beaches. So for example, by installing fake no parking signs, like the ones you see here in Rockaway, he actually made a map of every single one in the Rockaways. Or fake garages. Maybe they put in fake garages like they do in Malibu. So this is true. You can see in the picture in the bottom left, what they do is they put a fake garage in so they get a curb cut, so what you can see in the front, so that people can't park anywhere near the beach. From these headlines that we're seeing about outsiders, keeping outsiders, New Yorkers mostly, out of smaller suburban communities, it's clear they probably read the chapter on, for example, gates or one-way streets that only lead out of these communities, or residential parking permits. So here's a entry from the book about a community in the Detroit suburbs that started barricading the roads that lead from Detroit into the community. So for example, they used snow. They used a shed that's actually the anchor of a farmer's market right in the middle of the street. And more recently, public art, all these things to ensure that people from Detroit couldn't get to this suburb. It's called Grosse Pointe Park. Maybe they were doing this in Rhode Island too. Okay, so of course our first protagonist was disappointed when he read the second half of the headlines, but here the second half of the headlines had the opposite effect. The public realm, as we know, is being shut down for very good reasons. While it's no doubt true that, as a recent Curbed article put it, the efforts to protect residents from COVID-19 have demonstrated just how unevenly public space is distributed throughout urban America. It's also unclear what the alternative. So just as we have to make sure that the good things stick, biking, walking, reductions in carbon emissions, so too do we have to make sure that the bad things don't. Public space and access to it cannot sustain any damage long term. So this book, The Arsenal of Exclusion and Inclusion, is one of a few Interboro projects that I want to introduce you today. So let's meet Interboro. Interboro is myself, Georgine Theodore, and Tobias Armborst. We founded the company together. We actually met at the GSD in the Department of Urban Planning and Design, took some classes with Ann Forsyth. We started the practice immediately after. Georgine and Tobias are co-authors of everything you're going to see today. If I ever say I actually mean we. So, we call ourselves Interboro, mostly because it's a very ubiquitous, very everyday name in New York City. And as you see, we're interested in all things ubiquitous and everyday. So you see on our website that our focus is really on inclusive architecture and inclusive planning. I single that out because that's really what I want to talk to you about today, how we strive to design and plan with extensive input from residents. So I'm going to talk about a bunch of projects, 3 projects actually, and a bit more in detail, but I thought I would start by just give me a quick overview of the kind of work that we do, in part to make the point that everything we do is in one way about trying to bring people together. Indeed, the social distancing that's happening is anathema to the profession, right? So we design public spaces. This is a project called Lens Space in Lower Manhattan. This is a project I'll actually talk about in a bit more detail called Holding Pattern. This is an installation we did at the Venice Biennale a few years ago. Another installation called Rest Stop. This is our crack at the parklet riddle. I'm not going to say too much more about it. And actually, we've done some work on the Harvard Science Center Plaza, as you can see here, including the installation of a kind of shade canopy that we call Wavelength. We do a lot of planning as well, the neighborhood, city, regional planning. This is a winning entry to an unusual competition called Rebuild by Design. Sort of invited teams of architects to compete for federal dollars on behalf of communities damaged by Superstorm Sandy. This is a more recent plan that I actually am going to talk to you about, so I won't say anything about now. I just want to say we also do a lot of research and writing, but we always look for interesting non-white paper ways to present the research. So for example, this is a newspaper we made honoring the 100th anniversary of Manhattan's grid. So it features kind of fun ways of learning about the influence the grid has on our everyday life. So on the left, in 1811, these commissioners, these dudes drew a line on a map, and what does it mean for us day to day? On the right, it's a pedestrian playbook. It's a mathematical explanation of how you navigate the grid as a pedestrian in the most expedient way possible. There's games like bingo and grid tracks where you got to take a trace through the grid and figure out, was it a garbage man? Was it a dog walker? Was it a taxi? So on and so forth. This is a website we did about Manhattan's garment district. So you mouse over the building section and you get stories about the space of garment production or timelines illustrating the stages of garment production, or maybe comics that illustrate the production process. The point is really to illustrate the power of creative clustering, the idea that people are more creative when they're near each other, to return to this theme of propinquity. The arsenal you've already seen. All the projects that we do and everything you just saw, projects that we've done with a lot of participation, which is again, what I really want to focus on today. Truth is, we go through a lot of trouble just to get people to talk to us. So, for example, here's a table we made to get people to tell us what they like and don't like about Cambridge. We took it all over the city. Here's a puzzle that's meant to give us people's preferences for what to do with land suddenly made available by a freeway removal. Here's a crazy model of Newark, New Jersey. Here's a game that lets people reimagine a right-of-way. This is another activity about conflicts between vacant land. This is a kind of color forms activity that lets kids give us ideas about what to do in a natural playscape that we're designing. For a plan that we did in Detroit, we actually took over an ice cream truck. And so we gave kids free cones for input. So sometimes education and empowerment are our goals. So we just made this game to teach people about land use and zoning in Detroit. It's called Game of Zones. Pretty proud of that one. But it's a game, right? And so you're given different land use precedents, central business district, or low density residential, and you're given certain precedents, and you have to sort of play your hand, right? And sort of turn the board into high density residential or whatever. In fact, the cover image from this lecture comes from this project. This is actually a poster showing zoning recommendations for the city of Detroit. So the poster is actually an Easter egg hunt that gets decoded on the inside of the newspaper. We do make a lot of newspapers to get people involved, comic books, workshops, exhibitions like this one we had at the GSD. We'll do what it takes basically to get people to talk to us. Why do we do this? Why do we go to such lengths to solicit feedback? Designers and planners, they do community engagement for all kinds of reasons. And I think that kind of for us, community engagement is not what it should be, namely an open-ended, inclusive, and meaningful and fun dialogue that generates something unique and something site-specific. So for the remaining time, I want to take you through 3 recent and 1 maybe not so recent adventures in community co-design, in which we deploy engagement, close observation, and learning tools to create co-authored environments. So I'm actually going to start by talking about an oldie but goodie. This goes all the way back to 2011. In fact, this is a project for which we were not at all required or even expected to do community engagement, but which community engagement enhanced in surprising ways. By the way, I want to give a shout out to Lesser Gonzalez, who did some of the illustrations that you're seeing, the kind of Schoolhouse Rock stuff. He's a collaborator of ours, and we've worked with him for a number of years. In 2011, we're invited by MoMA PS1 to do a temporary installation in this courtyard that you see here in the foreground. And this is part of the Young Architects program. They do this every year. It's a short time frame, small budget, a lot of pressure. But it's a temporary project, right? And I think we were always very interested in this wall. The museum kind of separates from the neighborhood with a 16-foot tall concrete wall. The community board, turns out, hates it. They want to see it come down. They think it creates this kind of high-low divide in the neighborhood. So in our own way, we want to see if we could use this project to build bridges, right, across the wall. We figured out exactly what we wanted to do here. This is right across the street. You see that 16-foot tall concrete wall. This is a taxi stand. And the guy who runs the taxi, it's not there anymore, sadly, but the guy who runs the taxi stand, he had this little pavilion and something he did for his workers. So, seating, some shade, there's a canopy there. And we just had an epiphany. What they're asking us to do in the courtyard temporarily, seating, shade, other stuff. People are doing that in the neighborhood. And so we just wondered, could we make an installation out of things that people in the neighborhood need anyway? So the idea is we make something for somebody, but with the caveat that we've got to hold it in the courtyard for 3 months while this Young Architects thing is happening. And then at the end of the summer, when the program is over, we just give people their stuff, right? So we walked around the neighborhood for weeks, talked to anybody who would talk to us. So this guy had a ballet school around the corner, and he said, well, I need mirrors. I just expanded my ballet studio. I don't know what you would do with mirrors in a public installation, but that's what I need. This is Ozzy. He ran a Teamsters union right across the street, and he says, let's face it, this place could, use a facelift. Maybe a few trees and some outdoor furniture could help. talked to some kids, they wanted a rock climbing wall, so on and so forth. We actually talked to about 200 local businesses and institutions. It's a kind of Iron Chef style of design. We didn't pick the ingredients. We're just trying to cook something delicious with the ingredients that other people gave us. So this is what it ended up looking like. You know, it's a lot of eclectic objects, stools, lifeguard chairs, chaise lounges, breakdancing stages. We designed everything in this kind of Donald Judd aesthetic, this being the Museum of Modern Art. I think the idea was to take these community needs and kind of filter them through the lens of modern art and architecture. We also wanted to make everything look like a family. So you get a sense of that here. This is a smaller room where we took all the trees that people wanted and we just kind of aggregated them into this shady room. We couldn't plant them, so we just put mulch in there that a dog park needed and then sort of backfilled them with these straw bales. This is another room. Remember the guy who wanted the mirrors? We just kind of aggregated them in this small space here, making this psychedelic hall of mirrors. So here it is on opening day, and I think one of the things we didn't want to do here was create a big object. No disrespect to anybody who's ever done this project, because everyone is amazing in its own way. But I think one thing we thought is that this isn't so much an architecture project, it's more of a kind of urban design thing, right? So we wanted to have this column-free space for people to do stuff and interact with all these objects underneath. So you can see the sandbox. But we're always looking for opportunities to build bridges between the objects and the outside world. So here you see these oversized museum labels. So a lot of MoMA PS1's neighbors needed a way to cool off. So included in holding pattern are 5 kiddie pools that'll be donated to the neighbors who asked for them. And then we circled the space that they're gonna go to when the project's over. We made these tags as a means of just saying, hey, this doesn't belong to you or the museum. This tree belongs to the Forest Hills Library. This foosball table belongs to the Jacob Reese neighborhood house, so on and so forth. Made a little brand on top just to kind of make a sense that this is a family of furniture. So we also did some programming. So there are these big kind of hipster parties on Saturdays, but we were able to do programming on Sundays. And we just basically invited all the people we worked with to do events. So remember the guy who got the ballet mirrors? He was able to do a ballet performance with his students, which was great for him. He got to say, hey, my students have performed at MoMA PS1, which was cool. Did events with public library, did a neighborhood expo. So this is something we did with the 5 Points Aerosol Art Center, which is, you can see in the background here, unfortunately was torn down, but they did kind of b-boy workshops and aerosol art things. And this is one of my favorite days, I have to say, of the whole project. Made a newspaper. So this is a kind of centerfold that shows you all the stuff and sort of where it's going after the end of the project. And just to give you a quick summary here, so Eric wanted the mirrors, here they are in the holding pattern, and here they are installed at his ballet studio. Ozzy wanted some trees, here they are in the holding pattern, and then here they are being installed. I think we planted, with the assistance of some local nonprofits, we planted close to 80 trees, I think, as part of this New York restoration project. Here's the kids who wanted the rock climbing wall. Here it is in the holding pattern, and then here it is installed at the daycare center. So we try to mix it up, work with seniors, young people, everybody in between. But the goal was really to create a very diverse kind of space. There's this canopy that just provided a lot of shade. I won't say too much more about that, although there's a funny story there too. I would say we're taking a similar approach with the design of a natural playscape that is actually being built right now. So this is an 18-acre playscape in St. Louis's Forest Park. And it's presently under construction, and it should open in the fall. So a natural playscape, it's basically a playground without playground equipment. And it's meant to kind of get kids into nature by encouraging them to play in or with natural elements. So the scheme is a kind of pearl on a necklace scheme. And so we're linking what we call play areas, each one based on a different ecological theme, with an ADA accessible path that runs around. So here's a gravel bank with lots of rocks and streams and a big open meadow. and a smaller, more hilly meadow. This is a wetland and a muddy bottomland forest. So this being a place for kids, of course, we wanted to enlist kids in the design of this space. So the first thing we did was we built a mobile engagement station that we brought around to the city. And we wanted to use engagement to make co-authors of youth populations that were maybe underrepresented in Forest Park. So, so we had this kind of matrix where we identified the kinds of populations we wanted to engage with this engagement station. And then you see on the right, all the places we ended up taking this station. So what did we do? Well, first off, we had this kind of color forms activity. So we asked kids to pick from one of 5 site backgrounds. And then we gave them a kind of sticker book. And our prompt was, make something that looks like fun. And they did. And they collaged like the craziest things you could ever imagine. Things that were way crazier than we ever would have imagined or designed ourselves. So here are some of our favorites. And so, later on, we had a 3D version of this where we gave people buckets. One was grassy, one was rocky. And then we got some really nice results out of this as well. But the next step here was to translate. So basically what we did was we picked out some themes based on these collages, and we singled out some of our favorite ideas, as you see on the right. And then what we did was we just turned them into sketches. We said, maybe we can actually build some of these crazy things. And so what we did next was we thought we had to evaluate our process and our sketches. So we assembled a youth advisory committee. You can see their pin on the orange shirt there. And we asked them to evaluate what we did. Did we get it right? If we were to build these, how could we make them even more fun? So this was a fun process that we did. And once we had some prototypes, we put them out on the site, and we had the youth advisory committee come in and kind of play test them, give us feedback, and further refine them so that they'd be maximally fun. And then basically now we're building these things. So if you go back to those collages, there are things that are going to be in this Playscape that just started as a crazy kid collage, right? And we like that. I think that's really fun. And so, here's some examples. These things became construction drawings. And, this is from a virtual construction management meeting we had. So sorry for the grainy images, but this is the thing being built. And you can see some of the things that kids had collaged are actually taking shape right now. But the idea, and also we were doing interpretive signage. So we have these different shapes. Kids can tell other kids what to look out for, like turtles or something. They can imagine what something might become, or they can think about what something might say. And so the plan is to really stick these in the ground. And so right now, there's actually kids all over St. Louis who are making studying these different ecological zones and making these signs. But like the holding pattern project, the idea behind co-design here is to build a constituency, right? Again, the basic idea being that people are a lot more likely to visit a park if they help design it. So kids will be able to come here and say, see that crazy rock stump thing? I designed that. When we do another project, when we do community engagement, we're mostly listening, right? The engagement artifacts I showed in the beginning, they're all ways to get people to talk to us. But let's not forget that looking, observing is really crucial too. We spend a lot of time doing this, and this is a good example. So this is an old project that turned into a very new one. So this is in fact one of our earliest projects. It was an ideas competition entry to this competition called Shrinking Cities. And it's a project about Detroit, and a city that, as you know, has been in crisis for a very long time, and that for at least as long has been the target of visionary large-scale redevelopment plans from the 1940s Detroit plan to the 70s Renaissance plan to more recent Richard Florida-inspired attempts to sell the city to the creative class. What unites all these plans is that they bet on bridging something new to the city. But what about those people who are already there? Detroit's lost a lot of people, of course, but it's still pretty big. And of course, there are a lot of vacant lots. But even in the residential neighborhoods, there's obviously a lot of occupied ones too. And in fact, when we wanted to put a project together for this competition, we took a trip to Detroit. This is 2005, 6 maybe. And spending time in the city and just kind of driving around the streets, we noticed a different form of urban redevelopment, one that was not driven by big visionary ideas coming from the outside, but instead by the homegrown kind of self-interested practices of Detroit residents. More specifically, we noticed that people who stuck it out appeared to be spreading out. We thought this was interesting, especially because at the time, no one had really paid attention to this, to what people were doing in the face of depopulation and disinvestment. So for the project, we just kind of told the story of what was happening. We came up with a name, a blot. When a homeowner takes, borrows, or buys one or more adjacent lots, the connected lots form a blot. So this is Detroit, in the 1950s. Abandonment kicks in or is produced for reasons we don't have time to discuss here. This is where the story usually stops, but we kind of picked it up here and here. And so we're very interested in the way that basically people are rewriting the genetic code, the DNA of this city. You're going from something on the left to something on the right, something similar lots to something very, very different than that. And so, here's some pictures. People make driveways out of these blots and trampolines and swimming pools and basketball courts. And, some people just want to achieve some kind of classical symmetry for their house. You can see them driving around. You can also see them looking at property maps. So these are bundles of people who are blotting. You see here, there's the Terrell family and the Cardenas family, the Matesics and the Blaskiewiczes, and basically every block we saw evidence of this blotting or this kind of new suburbanism. And so for the project, we just kind of started to tell stories about the different people who were doing this, like Helen and Wanda here, Helen in the fuchsia, Wanda in the pink, who bought 4 lots and then each occupied a separate house, and then they reparcelized it and put a garden in the middle. So what you get is something totally different, something no planner would ever do, but which worked very well for Helen and Wanda. On the right, a lot for 2 on a 1/4 acre lot. Kind of cool. This is a different one. This is a 6 blot, a really big one by a family called the Anderins. They're so proud of their blot that they had their buddy fly over in a helicopter and take a picture of it. As you can see there in the bottom right. It's contagious. So the Anderins you see here, that's their 6-lot blot. They did it, and then their neighbors, the Christmases and the Crawleys got in on the action. It's interesting to see how people kind of change the architecture of these houses. So this is a guy named Victor who basically, 2003, he buys this. 2004, he buys this one. 2005, he just takes a lot next door because it's Detroit in 2005 and no one's paying attention. And he really changes, he makes a little compound. So the entry is no longer at the front door, it's through the alleyway. And he kind of makes the side entrance. So it's amazing to see how resourceful people can be here. And on his block too, it was contagious. So here you see all the kind of blots that were made there. So I want to say, for this project, our role was to be a ghostwriter. Kind of like, Mike Ditka, he's too busy. He's trying to win a Super Bowl for the Bears. He doesn't have time to write his story. He's got to hire a ghostwriter. And I think in the same way with this project, and in fact, for a lot of our projects, we're trying to tell a story, right? By people who are sort of too busy kind of living it. And that's kind of what we tried to do here. And we did it a number of ways. So we would have these kind of workshops. So that's Georgine Tobias and I, very long ago, kind of getting a lot of people together to talk about how did you get land next to your house? What did you do with your blot? So on and so forth. And for me, a success of this project is the fact that this term blotting is kind of part of the discourse now around shrinking cities. And that's great. That's kind of what we wanted all along. So the last project that I want to talk about is a project that builds on this. It's in some ways a continuation, and it's a new project that we just finished. After inviting ourselves to Detroit so many years ago, we kind of kept working there in the city. And we currently actually have 4 projects there. This one being a neighborhood plan for the Campau, Davison, Banglatown area. This is a project that just won an AIA award. And in fact, I also want to acknowledge our amazing project manager, Andrew Wald here, who did an amazing job with this project, as he does with all projects. This is a very, very diverse neighborhood with multiple generations and immigrants from Bangladesh, Yemen, and the Balkans, growing community of young artists as well. And, it's primarily single-family homes in the neighborhood, a lot of land bank owned lots. It's a framework plan, so there's lots of recommendations for open space and transit and housing and so on. But I want to focus on the fact that, again, here in 2020, we're again dealing with blots. So, for example, this is one of the areas of the study area, East Davison Village. A lot of vacancy and a lot of blotting. So here are all the parcels in this area. These are the ones that are owned by the Detroit Land Bank. Of those, these are the ones that are these are the ones that are privately owned. Of the privately owned, these dark green ones are blots, just like we saw in 2005. But beyond that, there's actually a lot of stewardship. So neighbors, they don't merely buy or appropriate adjacent properties, they actually take care of additional vacant land outside of their territory. So that's what these are. These are kind of stewarded lots. So just to give you an example, they mow the lawn, they pick up trash and so on. So this is Lonnie and Mike's corner store. They're cousins, they're longtime residents. They took over a corner store here, and they don't own the 3 corner lots around here, but they do mow them and they keep it clear of trash and debris. They also host regular pay what you want community barbecues on one of the lots. They have a neighborhood message and information kiosk on another one. And because there's no neighborhood basketball courts, they maintain a temporary basketball court there on the street. I could also point to Mr. Moten, who's a Bangladeshi immigrant farmer who runs a profitable farm operation on a cluster of 9 parcels, not all of which he owns. But he, started farming there, and he's kind of expanded his operation to raise goats and chickens and ducks. And on one of the lots, he actually has a market to sell his produce. Something else that's important and interesting that we discovered, a lot of innovative blotting practices that do more than just expand one's property. They're done for some kind of communal purpose. So this is New Hope in green at the center of the screen. This is an Islamic community center in a reused commercial space. And over time, the center bought adjacent vacant land based on the spaces that just became available. So, there's a large piece of vacant land, it gets turned into a soccer field. There's a bunch of abandoned gardens turned into a community garden. There's a large empty parking lot that gets turned into a vegetable market, as you can see here. So we see a pretty important neighborhood node for this large Bangladeshi community, a kind of new civic institution that just emerged out of a combination of kind of broadly famed mission to do something good on the one hand, and the pragmatics of blotting on the other hand, picking up real estate as it becomes available and finding new ways of kind of putting it to use. Another example would be Bandu Gardens. So this is a cooperative of Bangladeshi women who had quite a lot of success selling produce from the gardens. This is Bandu Gardens. Selling produce from the gardens of their homes a few blocks away, and who were looking to acquire more land not too far to expand their business and eventually set up a kind of industrial kitchen. There are a lot of other institutions in the neighborhood, Powerhouse being one of them. This is a great group of artists who have made a lot of blots and have actually turned them into very interesting community spaces, such as this Ride It Skate and Sculpture Park. Now, I just want to say that this is a form of land tenure that you cannot find in a database. You can't clearly identify just by looking around. The only way to get this information is by talking to people in the neighborhood, in community meetings, also in informal settings. So what did we do for this project? We did participatory mapping workshops to understand land stewardship. We did streetscape discussions centered around interactive models of the commercial corridor. We did kids focus groups. We did a lot of one-on-one on-site interviews and kind of walkabouts with neighborhood innovators. Did a lot of listening sessions with key local interest groups, like business owners, artists, or shown here, religious leaders who helped spread the word about the project. Made a newspaper just to kind of, which we distribute door to door, just as a way of helping people keep tabs on the project. And the most popular thing we did, as you saw earlier, this ice cream truck turned mobile engagement station, which cruised the neighborhood in the summer, giving out free ice cream in return for residents' ideas. So listening, looking, kind of suspending judgment. Doing this for a while, I really think, and we all think at Interboro, can bring you to some interesting places. We were hired in this project as city planners, as we usually are, but we always come to these projects as city fans. We were interested in cities and buildings, and we're especially interested in what people do with cities and buildings. So how they adjust spaces to their needs, how sometimes new meaning emerges in this process. For example, this is a street scene in Bangalore, where in preparation for a Bengali wedding, the side yard set back between these two homes acquires new meaning, right? It becomes an important festive space. So what do we do? What does this mean? And what does all this insight mean? What kind of policy or planning can we do with all this insight? The answer is a lot. I only got a minute left, so I'm just gonna focus on our disposition strategy. So remember all this vacant land owned by the land bank. On the one hand, we wanna reserve some for green infrastructure. So this is something we did, is sort of plan for this kind of green connector. The other thing we want to do, though, is we actually want to reserve some of that land for stewardship, for those people next door who are taking care of this land. Let's just give it to them, right? Third, and this is something that we're really excited about, is the bundling program. Why don't we proactively block? Right? Why don't we, instead of just trying to dispose of house on a lot, vacant lot, why don't we bundle all kinds of interesting configurations and try to sell that to the future Mr. Motons of the world, right? People who are going to take this and find something that's suitable for their particular needs. So that's 40 minutes. And I could say a lot more, but I do think I would rather use the time we have to just answer your questions. I hope you have some. I'm told that if I click on this Q&A thing, I'm going to see some. But in the meantime, I just want to say thank you all for listening. I know everyone's got so many other things on their minds right now. Again, I hope people are staying healthy and safe. But thank you so much for tuning in. I want to, again, just acknowledge my partners here, Georgina and Tobias, who worked on every slide that you saw in this presentation, and our amazing team at Interboro. There are too many people to name by name, but they all worked on these projects extremely hard. So thanks again. So I'm gonna go to the Q&A here, and I'm just gonna go through these, I guess, in the order in which they come up. So how did you come up with the name of your office? Because Interboro, if you live in New York City, Interboro is everywhere. There's Interboro Petroleum, Interboro Funeral Parlor, Interboro Auto Repair. And we just thought that was funny. It's everywhere. It's just this ubiquitous name. There was no Interboro architecture. There was no Interboro planning. So we just kind of thought it would be funny to join the Interboro family. So I'm gonna mark that one as done. Here's a question. How do you synthesize? Oh, I guess I can answer live. How do you synthesize so many divergent voices and interests to find a common direction to take a project forward? I think that, like anything, you do want to try to find some consensus. And you find, I think, that the more you get out there, the more you find. The key really is to ensure when you're doing engagement that you provide lots of vehicles and forums for people to give input, right? So you don't want to just do meetings. You want to go to where people are at. You also want to make sure that you meet people where they're at spatially, but also in terms of their aesthetics and their sensibilities. The ice cream truck in Detroit, that was something that came out of that neighborhood. It was a neighborhood where there was a guy who had a small ice cream empire and had a lot of kids who were, particularly mad about the ice cream truck. So I think that's really important, is just to get kind of as many voices as you can. Sometimes, as the question suggests, you do have to make decisions, right? And while they're based on consensus, you can't please everybody. And that's where your expertise as a planner comes in, right? For all the participation we do, we know that at the end of the day, we have expertise about these things, and we shouldn't be afraid to use that expertise and make decisions that we think reflect the priorities or will help communities get to where they want to be. Oh yeah, okay, here's a fun one. What was your criteria to evaluate the children's designs in the Playscape? Yeah, wow. In a way, we didn't, I think we turned to the kids for that. We took a kind of first pass at it, but when we assembled that youth advisory committee, we just laid them all out. And we said, all right, which ones do you like? So they helped a lot with that one. Okay, I'm just going in order here. Have you seen the redesign of a community lead to revitalization of economic activity in a depressed area? I definitely have seen, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think that, if I wasn't optimistic. Anne has said before that one thing that categorizes or classifies planners is that we're optimistic. I'm also optimistic, even in these terrible times. So I wouldn't be in this business if I didn't think that redesigning communities or planning communities with people could revitalize economic activity. So absolutely. Maybe I'll collect some emails here and get back to you with some things that I've seen that are particularly memorable. So okay. Even when done perfectly well, co-design with community tends to end once a project is completed. Have you come across ways to ensure that collaboration with community continues long-term, even after opening day? That's a good one, Jessica Myers. So let's see. Yes, I think that it's something we always, well, the first thing is we always strive to be clear about what the scope is. I mean, at the end of the day, we're a company and we have a scope and we have to stay on time and on budget. And at a certain point, yes, the project is over. So one of the things that's really important is to have a good implementation plan. And that's a part of all the kind of plans that we do. Part of that implementation plan is really to ensure that the kind of seeds that you plant can be carried with others. So with planning projects, that's what you want to do. You got to make sure that you're, first of all, proposing things that are realistic and have kind of political support and community support, of course. But you also have to kind of help ensure that you are setting things up so that people can help implement your ideas. When it comes to kind of public spaces and stuff, we really hope that some of the structures that we set up continue. So we really hope that this youth advisory committee that we set up, we really hope that that continues. It's a little bit out of our control, but we're certainly gonna make a pitch for that. Okay, so let's see. If you reflect on the PS1 project in particular, what would you do differently, or what unexpected events surprised you during the design, construction, post-event distribution process? Yeah, good one. I haven't thought about it in a while. That project's old enough that I don't want to say I've forgotten about it, but I don't think about it too much. But what would I do differently? I think maybe would have been a little more systematic about the process of getting all these ideas. I think it was very unscientific. I think we all, Georgine, Tobias, and I, and everyone else who was working with us at the time, I think we just kind of walked around and very informally knocked on people's doors. I think it would have been better to have something more coordinated so that everybody in the neighborhood had a chance to nominate something that they needed. I think it could have also added to the strange, eclectic mix of objects that we ended up making. So that's one thing. Of course, you learn things about construction too. You learn, for example, that marine grade plywood needs to be coded a lot in order to weather the outdoors and things like that. But certainly we learned a lot of lessons there. Okay, so from Susan, I particularly enjoyed to see the creative ways you engage the communities and variety of people to share in education. Oh, thank you for that comment, Susan. I really appreciate that. And let's see. Oops, where am I? David, do you think coronavirus will have an impact on how we think about city planning? I do. And like I said, I think that what's important is that we use it as an opportunity to take the good things we see, reduce carbon emissions, more people biking, all the things that we as planners want to see, and avoid the bad things, the park closures and all that stuff. I don't think, actually, you know, we're talking a lot about this, Ann and I and others in the UPD department, really talking a lot about this question and still unpacking it. I mean, I think nobody really knows. I think we're optimistic that that this won't in the long term be too much of a blow to ideas of density and propinquity. You know, hope there's a lot of the countries and cities really that manage this best were some of the densest cities on the planet, right? So I think we're optimistic that we can just not throw the baby out with the bathwater and thinking about how we retrofit our cities to deal with future pandemics. Good question. Okay, so let's see here. Can you tell us about the process and time it takes to build relationships and trust when working with communities? Yeah, it takes a long time, longer than you typically have, to be honest. One of the things that we do, so in all the projects that I showed you, in all the projects that we do, we partner with local firms, people who already have trust in the community that we're working in. I'm sorry, I didn't really get a chance to name all of the different people who were involved in the projects I showed you. But there were a lot of people, and that is one of the first things we do. We try to find partners who are closely trusted in those communities, and they sort of make an introduction to us. And we try to be nice, and we try to be responsible, and we try to give people a sense that we really care. We always follow up, and there are a lot of protocols, basic protocols that we encourage all of our subs and employees to follow. Okay. Oops, sorry, let's see. I skipped Sarosh, I'll come back. But Gwen, say something about any connection between the co-housing and intentional communities movement and something like blotting, or potential for connections. That's a good one. I mean, so, you know, I didn't get a chance to talk about my teaching here. I'm here with my Interboro hat on. But I did teach a studio in the fall called Affordability Now, and we looked at affordable housing and we looked at intentional communities and co-housing. Never made that link between blotting and co-housing, but somebody should, and maybe we should. So I have no thoughts about that, but thank you for the suggestion. It's a very good one. Okay, Sarosh, how do you generate funding for your projects? In different ways. I mean, at the end of the day, we're a for-profit company. We're an LLC. So all the projects you see are projects that we were paid for. We put together a scope, we put together a budget, and we sent invoices in and got paid. There are other projects, though, as suggested here, that we do for less money, or that we do as kind of self-interested projects. MoMA PS1 was not one of them. Neither the first Detroit project was. And I think we funded that because we were young and we had a little bit more time, and we all had day jobs. So we were able to kind of do that project in our off time. It was in some ways a labor of love. I think other projects, the book, we got lots of grants for, NISCA, Grant Foundation. Gosh, I hope I'm not leaving out others. But we're grateful to anyone who sort of gave us money for that. So thank you for that question. Let's see. Okay. Well, David, it's got to run. So I'm going to skip that one because there's so many questions here and they're all so good. If the newspapers are available somewhere, yes, they are. Send me an email. We'll try to get you some. And also, we're working on a, hate to call it a monograph, but we're working on a book that collects the work we've done over the past 15 years, and you'll see some of the papers in there for sure. Oh, hi, Jesse. I know you. Been a while. And let's see. interested in new suburbanism, which I think of as old urbanist suburbanism. Yeah, where you've shown that tactical urbanism can either be exclusive or inclusive. What about suburbs that were built? Oops, where'd that one go? Oh, suburbs that were built with those exclusive walls and cul-de-sacs as its suburban fabric. Have you seen strategies where they can be more inclusive? One of the lessons of the book that we wrote, The Arsenal of Exclusion and Inclusion, by the way, shout out on that project to Riley Gold, who worked very, very closely with us on getting that book out. One lesson of that book is that people are incredibly resilient. And one of our favorite essays, Georgine Tobias and I, one of our favorite essays is Walking in the City by Michel de Certeau. And I'm sure a lot of you have read it. And the gist is, people are gonna bite back. You can't enslave people. A grid is kind of rigid, but people find all kinds of ways to make it their own. And we believe that. And a lot of our work is kind of inspired by that kind of work, and also by the work of people like Margaret Crawford, who I think is kind of carrying on de Certeau. Margaret Crawford at Berkeley, who's a great inspiration to us. So yes, people are resilient and they find ways to make things more inclusive. That said, the other half of the book is talking about structural racism and things that people unfortunately have no control over. So sort of about understanding the mix. So I see that we're at 103. I'm going to answer a couple more. Paige or Ann, if you want to shut me down, that's cool. I understand. I know that's 103. And if folks need to leave, of course, please do. But I'm having fun and I'm learning a lot from these questions. Okay, Rachel, how do you budget for this level of outreach? We frequently face the issue of potential clients making a budget that includes extensive community engagement. Yeah, it's hard. We have to really convince clients that it's worth it. And we do. We don't like to do this on the cheap, and we certainly don't do it because it's charity. And we just have to really convince our clients that it's worth it. And we've had great clients. Our clients for the Nature Playscape, Forest Park Forever, they were terrific. And they gave us, they understood the importance of reaching out to kids. Same thing with Envision Cambridge, a project we worked on with UTEAL. We did engagement for that, and they were fantastic. The city gave us they understood the importance of that orange table and all the other activities we did. Okay. Joe, how might your project in Detroit have looked if it occurred during this pandemic? Any approaches stand out as particularly resilient to social distancing? Thanks, Joe. I want to say that I want to actually use this as an opportunity to say how difficult community engagement is in social distancing. We're working on a number of projects right now. They're all going forward, and they all need community engagement. So really struggling. Georgine Tobias and I and our team at Interboro are really struggling to think of kind of web-based ways to do engagement. And we've had some success, but it's a little bit difficult. So I'll leave that at that. It's a good question. Meryl, curious if you've had thoughts about engagement tools for remote interactions. Oh, yep. Is it possible to do substantive engagement in this way? Do you have an example? Everybody's trying to figure that out right now. And in fact, I was on a conference panel thing, an internal thing with my colleague Bree Henshold. Bree teaches with me in the MUP Corps, runs a company called Agency. And we brought together people who are doing community engagement to answer this question. And people did have some examples ranging from, text is in and some of these kind of app-based engagement tools to just using Zoom like we're doing right now. This seems to be working pretty well, I think. But I think we're going to have to think of new ways to think about this. I also want to say that, I mentioned that observation is a big part of what we do. The internet is just full of tons of clues about what people think about their spaces, right? So if you're looking at a place, put it into YouTube, put it hashtag in Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and see what comes up. I mean, there's a lot that you can glean. You'll learn a lot about places by just looking at the traces that people have left about these neighborhoods. So that's a tool that I'm kind of psyched about. I'm going to quickly skip here to Jonathan Tauby. Hi, Jonathan. I haven't seen you in ages. I hope everything's well. Jonathan was a student of mine at the Maryland Institute College of Art many moons ago, who I believe now is an architect. How does Interboro conduct post-evaluation of projects? Is this something that your clients are interested in, or is it something for your own practice? To be honest with you, this is something we don't do enough. I think this is, in part because it's got to be budgeted for, and it's not always easy to convince clients to put that in the scope, but it should be in the scope. And I know, Anne is always talking about pushing evidence-based learning, something we all strive to do. And in order to have good evidence-based learning and to evaluate how we're doing on that front, we need ways to learn what went right, what went wrong. And so we do it sometimes, but we don't do it as much as we should. Maybe I'll take two more. Is that okay? Paige, you can put something in the commenter there, or Anne, if you think two more is okay, or if I should just end now. Let me go with Evelyn. Thank you for the insight. Given current pandemic, have you all developed outreach and engagement strategies for this time? Yep, we have. I sort of did that one. Thank you. It's a great question. So can we say a little bit more about the ice cream truck, how it is funded? Yeah, I mean, that came out of a project budget. We had that was another great client in Detroit, Detroit Planning and Development Department, and they really were terrific, and they understood the value of engagement, and they were down, and they liked the idea of the ice cream truck. And but we were also fine. We were also lucky, I'll say, in that we just made a lot of friends in the neighborhood, many of whom were willing to help. And I think, frankly, it was a good deal for the ice cream truck guy, because we bought all the cones, so he was insured, like selling a certain amount of cones per day. We just bought that many cones. So it worked. We had to be a little resourceful, but I do want to acknowledge that we had a great client there who believed in and funded our engagement efforts. Oh, if it isn't Eric Shaw, my good friend Eric Shaw. How's it going, Eric? How do your projects work in fast-growing, high-cost cities like London or San Francisco? We don't know so much because we've never worked in London or San. Well, we have worked in London, but I don't know what kind of lessons I have there. But we have certainly done a lot of work in New York, and I would say it really depends on the project, right? So, and I'm being told, Eric, you're the last question. So, Eric, by the way, if you don't know, used to be the director of the DC planning office, and is a GSD alum. So, I would say it really just depends on the project. I will say personally, I love working in my own backyard in New York, and I love working in the Londons and San Franciscos of the world. But to be honest, I much prefer working in places that are not fast growing, both in practice and also in my own teaching. I taught a studio called Refugees in the Rust Belt. I've taught studios. I'm very interested in Rust Belt environments. We're working on a project right now in Utica, New York, which I'm pretty excited about. These are kind of my favorite places to be and work in. I don't know why. But thanks for that question, Eric. And being given the cane here, I guess it's time. I want to again just thank everybody for coming. And oh my gosh, I'm seeing questions here from old friends. Pedro, how's it going, man? Patrick, how you doing? Wow, okay, sorry. But again, if you have questions, I can't promise I'll get to them, but feel free to shoot me an email. I do really appreciate all these really thoughtful questions. Thanks everyone for coming and for sticking around. It's good to see so many people here. Wow, I didn't realize how many of you were here. That's really terrific. And stay tuned for future events here at the GSD. There's a great lecture series coming online. Check at the GSD website for that. And like Interboro on Facebook and Instagram. And don't be a stranger. And stay safe and healthy, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.